Hey everybody, welcome to episode 20 of my Musical Moments series. Today, a little bit of background, one of those names that you might have heard over the years and you think, who the heck is that? Nadia Boulanger. Welcome back. So today we're going to talk about, again, one of those names that just seems to keep coming up, and I feel like maybe not everybody knows who this person is. You know, with both of the orchestras that I work for, I have been filming some digital content for them. So the Sequoia Symphony Orchestra, we've had 2 episodes of our digital season come out. If you haven't seen those, take a look there. With the Adrian Symphony, we finished filming everything and music's all ready to go. We're just waiting for those to post. We don't have a link to share with you yet, but we will very, very soon. So definitely keep an eye out for that, and we'll be sharing those as well. So some wonderful content. But in both of those cases, I'm recording short introductions that introduce the pieces and the musicians, etc. And one of those names that keeps coming up in those introductions is the name Nadia Boulanger. And I do feel like sometimes people are like, well, I don't know who that is, but he seems to act like it's a big deal, so I guess it is. Well, I thought I'd say, hey, this is why this person is such a big deal and why we talk about her kind of in hushed tones, very reverentially, because really her impact on music of the 20th century, and especially on American music of the 20th century, is incredibly deep and incredibly broad. So as I said, her name just continues to come up when we talk about particularly American composers. And that's certainly the case here. So to tell her story, we jump all the way back to 1887 when she was born in Paris. She came from a family of musicians. Her grandparents were musicians. Her parents were musicians. But initially, she did not show any interest in music. In fact, if anything, that she seemed to act, whenever she heard music, she would just start yelling. So they thought maybe her ears were super sensitive or something. But she showed no interest in the family business, if you will, of music at that time. In fact, it wasn't until her younger sister was born, when Nadia was about 5, her younger sister LILI was born and got a lot of attention. And so maybe in an effort to kind of say, hey, I'm still important, pay attention to me, firstborn, Nadia walked over to the piano and played a tune perfectly, it is said, the story goes, at the piano the very first time that she had heard out on the street that day or something like that. And her family was like, whoa, this kid's got some musical talent. Well, Nadia devoted herself fully to music after that. So she worked 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week studying everything that you can imagine, studying other composers' work, studying counterpoint, studying solfege, studying theory. Like, she threw herself into work and did that really for the rest of her life. Now, her younger sister, LILI, who I mentioned was born, she could not have been more different. LILI didn't initially show much interest in music, but then, she was like, oh, I'm kind of interested in music. And she wrote her first piece at the age of 6. She actually wrote an opera by the age of 13. And both of the sisters, they entered the most important musical competition of the day, which was called the Prix de Rome, which was an award given from the Paris Conservatory, sponsored there more or less. And if you would win it, it was a several-year award where you would go to Rome and study, and performances of the work that you would produce there as a composer. So you could write things in Rome, and then you were guaranteed performances of the pieces that you produced there. Well, the older sister, Nadia Boulanger, she entered that thing 3 or 4 times, and then finally on her 4th try, she won second prize in that, which was still kind of a big deal. No woman had ever won that. And she kind of had to twist some arms because there was some bias against women composers at that time, certainly, and all the judges, of course, were men on the panel. So there is a sense that she really had to kind of work hard to be recognized. And it was a huge deal when she won second prize there. Now, a couple of years later, her sister, again, couldn't be more different. Her sister never took music that seriously, but just, it all came so easy to her. Like, she didn't have to practice that much. It just, her ears were great. She didn't have to work that hard. The things that she produced were just beautiful and lovely. So you could probably guess when her sister entered the Prix de Rome competition, she won the thing first time out. Again, their lives could not have been more different. Tragically, LILI, the younger sister, she died before the age of 25 and didn't produce that much music in that time, but the music that we do have is really lovely and thankfully just beginning to again be heard, and we're kind of rediscovering some of that music. The older sister, Nadia, she lived to be 92, I think, actually, by the time she finally passed away in 1979. So gosh, she lived a long time. But Nadia actually stopped composing. Soon after her sister's death, Nadia stopped composing completely and really focused her time on music education. And that's really where she had this incredible, incredible mark. So in order to understand this, we need to look a little bit back at world history. So right after World War I, there was enormous affection for Americans and the United States in general from the French people. There was really this sense that the Americans came and rescued the French, and really saved them and liberated the French during World War I. And so the French people and French institutions were really looking for ways to say thank you to America and Americans for that help and support. And so this American school in Paris invited composers to come, and one of the first people to sign up for it was Aaron Copland. That first group had Roger Sessions, Aaron Copland, and Walter Piston in it, that first group of musicians. But Aaron Copland arrived in Paris, and people said, oh, you've got to go study with Boulanger, go to her harmony class. And Aaron Copland was like, I don't need to study harmony. I've studied harmony for years, I get it. There's nothing really for me to learn. People said, no, just go to her lesson. You'll learn something. So begrudgingly, he kind of goes to her lesson, and right away, he was transformed by it. The way that she approached harmony with this enthusiasm that bordered on kind of maybe like a religious zeal. Like, she was so passionate about it, and she would take apart entire symphonies, huge works, and say how they were really built on this very basic harmonic structure. And she could remember examples of things. She would just go over to the piano and play something that she maybe heard years ago. She had this incredible memory, and Copland was convinced right away. And then the idea of studying composition with her came up too. And Copland tells this story. He says, well, I couldn't think of any great composers who studied with a female teacher. So then I thought, well, I guess I'm just going to have to be the first great composer to study with a female teacher. So he was very sure of his own talent, I guess, even then, but it turned out to be the case. And for Boulanger, every American that Copland met over the next several decades, young and old, if they were serious about composing and asked advice of him, he would say, go to Paris and go study with Boulanger. So over the years, she worked with this who's who of American composers. We're talking about people like Mark Blitzstein or Virgil Thompson, David Diamond. I just mentioned Walter Piston already. It's just an incredible who's who of important American composers. And what made her so special is that she didn't necessarily tell composers to write like someone else or to write like her, but she really was known for helping composers to find their own individual voice. And that is incredibly powerful. So she had a student like Aaron Copland who had this very, very distinct style, but over the years she worked with other composers who also had incredibly distinct styles. So you had someone studying with her like Elliot Carter, this incredible modernist, dissonant music. He didn't sound anything like Copland, but she helped those composers to find their own voice. Then maybe the French composer, Michel Legrand, he was a film composer and pop songwriter. His music doesn't sound like Elliot Carter's or like Aaron Copland's. And then maybe someone else came to study with her. Philip Glass actually came and studied with her, this minimalist composer. And she helped them to all identify their own individual voices. Even somebody as diverse as Quincy Jones. Later on, Quincy Jones went and studied with her, the producer and composer and film composer. And his music doesn't sound anything like the rest of them. So she had this incredible gift for helping composers to find their unique voice. And that really is the hallmark of a great educator. So as you know, I'm really all about stories and storytelling. So I think maybe the best way to kind of illustrate what made Boulanger so special lies in a couple of stories. Now, she knew Leonard Bernstein, and the two of them, although they had never really officially studied together, they were dear friends because Copland had said, hey, Lenny, when you're in Paris, go meet with her. And he arranged for her to come to New York and even conduct the New York Philharmonic. When he was the conductor there, she had been to New York earlier and actually had conducted the New York Phil, and she conducted the Boston Symphony and the Philadelphia Orchestra. She was the first woman to conduct all three of those groups. Now, in fact, she was interviewed when she was in Boston. She was interviewed and someone said, "Hey, so what's it like to be the first woman to conduct the Boston Symphony?" And her response to that was, "Well, you know, I've been a woman now for 50 years, so I'm pretty much used to the idea." One of the other great stories about Boulanger was when George Gershwin met her. So in the 1920s, he was traveling in Paris. He wrote a little thing called American in Paris, right? So we know he spent some time there, but he was in Paris and wanted to meet with Boulanger and said, "Hey, I want to study with you." She's like, "Great, you know, play some music." Gershwin was already pretty famous at that point, so she knew that he had a career in New York as a songwriter and was branching out into maybe some more serious things by this time. So he played for her, and very famously, she said to him, "There's nothing I can teach you." Gershwin told that story for the rest of his life about how Nadia Boulanger had told him that. And some people have said, well, she told him that maybe because she didn't think he was teachable, or that he was too old, or something along those lines. But I think it ties in with that same idea that she was really about helping composers to find a unique and individual voice. And Gershwin came to her and really had that already. You know, Gershwin did Gershwin. And by the mid-1920s, Gershwin knew who he was. And his style was so distinct and so unique, it's hard to imagine Boulanger saying, well, this guy needs some help finding his voice. And so most likely, and this is, I think, how Gershwin took it too, because he kind of used it as a badge of honor later. Well, Boulanger said, she had nothing to teach me. And which I think is really a wonderful, wonderful story. The other thing I would mention is that Boulanger, along with Copland, the other person that she was incredibly close to her whole life was Igor Stravinsky. And so she was at the premiere of The Rite of Spring and thought it was absolutely brilliant. And so she became friends with Stravinsky. And in fact, he sent her early copies of all of her new pieces. She often had a Stravinsky score that she would teach her students about. And she didn't love all 20th century music, to say the least, but she was a huge advocate of Stravinsky. And so Stravinsky, on the other hand, he was out there telling all of these young people who would ask him, how do I be a composer? He'd say, go study with Boulanger. So all throughout the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and into the 70s, you had Copland on the one hand and Igor Stravinsky until he passed away, the two most important voices really in Western classical music of the 20th century, telling anyone who would listen, go study with Boulanger. So you can just imagine not only all the direct people that we know studied with her, that incredible diversity there, but think of all the indirect people, the thousands of people maybe we don't know of by name, but they influenced a whole generation, like myself. Like I studied with someone who studied with Boulanger and who told me some of those lessons and you know, the specific stories, but also the spirit of those stories. And so I think that there's an incredible depth in her teaching that really carries on today. And I'm so proud to be a part of that. And I think it's really important to share it with you because, again, I just feel like that's a name that we don't hear enough. So as we wrap up here, we were actually hearing a little bit of the recording that she conducted of the Fauré Requiem. She made several records early on in the 1950s and 60s. Eventually she didn't really like records because she thought they didn't breathe and live anymore. They kind of locked things in. But this was a very famous recording that was issued right after she passed away, even though she had done it many, many years before. So you're hearing a bit of this Fauré Requiem that she conducted. Below you will see a like button. I hope you will click it if you haven't done so already. Below you will also see a subscribe button. I hope you will click it if you haven't done so already. And very excited as we moved into episodes 21 through 30, which I already have planned out as we move forward in this series. Thanks so much for joining me for at least some of my first 20 episodes. Can't believe they've gone so quickly, but I will look forward to talking with you next week. Thanks very much.